So on life and health, I just wanted to frame the discussion with two slides. First, at the PSI, we wanted to demystify and eliminate the misconception that sustainability in an insurance context is really only a non-life insurance agenda. So we talk about ESG and insurance. People normally think about coastal assets, extreme events, and the damage it will do to cities and communities. And that's a legit view because we can see that happening around the world. But in the life and health insurance branch, there's actually ESG, a lot of materiality of ESG is relevant. So last year, after we produced a non-life ESG guide in 2020 for non-life insurance, we the working group of the PSI and Life and Health created the first ever ESG guide for life and health insurance business. And just like all branches of finance, once you go deeper into the weeds, you can see that life and health is a very different kettle of fish compared to non-life insurance. And this is why, for me, this is simply a mark of sophistication that over time, we understand what ESG or sustainability means across lines of insurance business. So you can see here in the Life and Health ESG guide, we're talking about the four main underwriting risks for a life and health insurer: mortality, morbidity, hospitalization, and longevity. And we've juxtaposed that with different ESG issues that were deemed relevant by life and health insurers. So you can see antimicrobial resistance, climate change is there, but also infectious diseases, ecosystems, etc. So this is the definitive framework out there on what is good practice in terms of looking at ESG issues in the context of life and health underwriting portfolios. Then this year, we followed this up with a report that really looks at how can life and health insurers drive better health outcomes and also close the protection gap. So this is a two-pronged approach. How can we, can the industry be a lever for preventing health losses to begin with, promoting healthy lifestyles. At the same time, how can it also lead to greater insurance protection for the particularly for the most vulnerable there, and particularly in a post-COVID environment where we've seen how devastating the impacts of COVID has been to communities around the world. And there's a 4-point action plan there that we touched on, from affordability of insurance to prevention as a really key step in the insurance process. If there's fintech, there's insurtech, telemedicine, all of those things that we're trying to use using technology, and obviously there's strength in numbers, collaboration is key. So without further ado, we'll have the panel here, and we have 4, I would say, real experts in this space of life and health and sustainability. I'll start off with Teresa from HSBC, because HSBC Insurance, the insurance outfit of HSBC, actually chairs the life and health working group of the PSI. And we go down the line with another insurer, and then before we go to a market association like the Geneva Association. So Teresa, would be good to hear your thoughts at HSBC Insurance on the thinking on ESG and life and health business, because I think it's important for peers in the industry, but also other stakeholders, to understand what is the role of life and health in the sustainability agenda. And this is not simply an investment agenda where life and health insurers with their long-term as long-term institutional investors, which is already has a lot of traction, but this is really focused on the underwriting side of the house. Yeah.
First of all, thanks, Butch, and also thanks for the UNEP FI PSI team for inviting me and also HSBC to take part in today's panel discussion, where we bring together insurance companies like health associations to discuss a very important topic for the life and health insurance business on how we manage ESG risk. I think, as Butch has previously mentioned, I think for in compared to non-life insurance business, there has been generally lack of understanding or discussion on key ESG issues for the life and health insurance business. And also, I think over the years, we have talked quite a lot and focused on what is the role of life and health insurers from an institutional investor perspective. These are all key contributions that we can play, but does it mean that that is not necessarily linked to the core of our insurance business, which is all about underwriting? And as Butch mentioned, it's also a privilege for honor for HSBC Insurance to lead this PSI work stream. It all started late 2021, Butch, I think. And as a first step of starting that PSI work stream, we developed a PSI member survey because we would like to understand from an industry perspective, what do we see are our key ESG risk issues, challenges or opportunities from a life and health insurance perspective. And I'd like to share some results, some surveys to kickstart our discussion later. From the context of sustainable development goals, I think we, majority of our PSI member from the industry, we ranked three out of the 17 sustainable development goals as top risks as well as top opportunities. And those goals are related to promoting good health and well-being, reducing inequalities, and also like climate action. And at the same time, we also asked about what exactly are the top sustainability risk issues that are associated with our life and health insurance industry. And interestingly, the top 5 are all related to social in nature, which I will name some of them like health risk prevention, social and financial exclusion. It could be linked to unhealthy lifestyle, obesity, and aging population. So I think based on these insights as a working group, and it's also very glad to have all the support from different PSI member companies. I think our work group composed of more than 10 up to 15 working companies, and we have like regular calls and meetings. And the first work of the ESG underwriting guide is essentially we would like to demonstrate what is actually the potential impact of different ESG risks we have on the 4 core underwriting risks. And in that framework, we also include some high-level mitigation examples. For example, on social risk, we talk about the risk of poor insurance literacy. Some highlight examples like developing more easy to understand product materials, because I think we still intend to use quite a lot of insurance jargons in our T&Cs, not necessarily easy for our customer to understand. So the ESG underwriting guide, I think it's the first of publication, and we hope that through this framework, it will add as a supporting tool for the insurance company to take as a reference, because we appreciate that different companies, they might be in different journeys of the sustainability agenda, but hopefully this will be some supporting tool. And then I think I would just briefly talk about the paper, because I think the paper, which is Health is the Greatest Health, is particularly important in the post-COVID world, because the post-COVID, in the COVID pandemic really highlights the importance of us, of people to have a more like preventive and leading a healthier lives, and at the same time, how we can, from an insurance perspective, expand the access of insurance, especially for those most vulnerable groups. So I think I'll pause here because I think we'll have more discussion on what are the specific actions we as insurers could help to progress and to help our customers to lead healthier lives and longer lives in the long term.
Thank you, Teresa. Just a quick follow-up question on base what you've said. How did you bring this at HSBC to the level of senior management to make it such a priority that you get to take ownership of it at the PSI level, where you have peers in the market on this? Because I think it's a good case on how one could champion it in the industry.
Yeah, I think for HSBC Insurance, we're primarily like a life insurance, life and health insurance, and I think supporting customer health and well-being is a core element of our overall sustainability strategy. And I think with our Hong Kong insurance business CEO being a PSI board member, stepping up to lead this work stream is a demonstration of our commitment as one of the players in the industry on how we can collectively work together to think of ways that we could really drive better health outcomes, and also I think it's also a time for us to have this opportunity and responsibility to change to start shifting from a more claims-based model to a more preventive healthcare model.
I say that because I thought HSBC Insurance really impressed me. So you have Teresa as the Global Head of Sustainable Insurance. You have the CEO in Asia based in Hong Kong. And at our event in London a couple of months ago, the group chairman of HSBC, this is not just HSBC Insurance, it's the whole banking group, was there to actually champion the work on life and health insurance. And I think it's very seldom that we see all levels of the organization be very much aligned, particularly in a life and health context. It's very inspiring to see how that could be, how HSBC was able to have that internal alignment on life and health and sustainability being a core priority of their value proposition. Let's move over. Before we go to London, we're going to go to Toronto. And we have Moira here, who's going to give us a really good North American flavor and a Canadian perspective on this. She's also the chair of the PSI board, and she's been involved in this actually in a lot of work of the PSI, and she's wearing so many hats, but I think one of her loves is this initiative on life and health. Moira, your view, please.
Absolutely, and you're right, Butch. When I joined the PSI board, this was one of the starting or contributing to developing a life and health agenda was one of my first priorities. So it's been absolutely wonderful to see two of these papers done at the international level. And I'd also like to remind you that also this year, the Canadian PSI members, working with the UN, actually also released a paper on life and health. So we've had 3 papers on life and health, one being regional through Canada, on addressing the protection gap. And from the Canadian point of view for that paper, and certainly part of my reasoning of being part of these other, this last paper particularly, is as insurers move into the social aspect of sustainability and the social aspect as part of a business proposition. We're not talking about charity here, but finding business products and business rationale for interacting on social issues. It creates a great deal of concern and perceptions of risk within your own organization because you're stepping into areas that are completely innovative, where there are not examples of companies doing work in this space before. You are creating value and looking for intersections with needs that have not been addressed. So that can create some concern in heavily regulated, many-layered organizations. So the Canadian group really wanted to come together and put a bit of a framework and context around how to approach these issues, and particularly the protection gap. And if I flip over to the work that we did on the Life and Health Group and the paper that was released in June, the use of all of the case studies was so helpful in showing that there's companies around the world that are already making a difference and making an impact in a profitable way through products and services that are addressing social issues. So putting together the Canadian work and framework with the broader paper from the UN, it's been really helpful as a company to move forward on products and services in the life and health space that are addressing social issues, and to address concerns of control partners about moving too far ahead on the agenda for a large financial institution's comfort. So one of the themes that has come out a lot today has been about the importance of partnerships and working with experts and other groups. And Teresa and I were reflecting over lunch today how important it was to have other companies to bounce ideas off of, to share experiences. It's also very important, and it came out in the work of both groups, to have partners that are outside of your institution. We're talking about changing health outcomes and improving the resilience of individuals. They're areas that we're not experts in. And so there's a real need to connect with groups that you're trying to help. If you just go out as an insurance company and think that you can figure out a solution for a group that is not currently protected, either because it's specifically excluded as part of your underwriting, or because it's a group which you haven't got a distribution connection to, you could potentially do more harm than good. So it's absolutely important, and the work that we've done on both papers really underscored the importance of connecting with these groups and working collaboratively to deeply understand the issues and to work together on solutions so that you actually created value for the group that you're trying to serve.
Thank you, Moira. The one thing that I can say that struck me the most about the Canada work, along with other work in North America, is the notion that when we think about vulnerable communities, right, you automatically think about developing countries and the global south. And true, it's very acute there, and it's really, people are in dire straits. But the same can be said in Canada. The same can be said in California. And I think this was really unpacked in that, in the Canadian study of how insurers could actually, it's closer to home than one thinks, right? So could you extrapolate a little bit more on that, Moira? Because people would always think like, well, Canada is part of the G7, but there's actually a lot of social vulnerabilities there that are being exposed, be it COVID or climate, the cost of living crisis. Could you expand a little bit more on what we saw there that could really help the industry be a force for good there in Canada?
Sure. So I'll take 2 points here. One is about making sure that you have access to the actual people in the communities that you're looking to help. So the disability movement has a phrase, I hope I get it right, nothing for us without us. Mm-hmm. And at TD Insurance, we have a couple of programs with internships where we have an Indigenous internship program and a people with disabilities program. And I had a student from both of those programs, the great privilege of having students from both of those programs as part of my group this summer. We learned an enormous amount from those individuals, and taking the approach, the framework from the Canadian paper, we had them in our product discussions. We asked them, how can we better serve these communities? Butch, I can't tell you how powerful it was to have an individual who had a disability sitting in a product meeting and looking the product manager straight in the eye and saying, you are specifically excluding me from ever getting insurance. What are you going to do to include me? And I know my voice is shaking a little bit. It was such a powerful moment. It changes the whole thinking of a company when you are looking the individual in the eye and getting that kind of challenge. It's transformative. So that connection to other groups, to other expertise, even to diversity and inclusion. I struggle now that I've had the experience of understanding how as a company we can develop products and services for communities that are underserved or specifically excluded from our products without having them on staff. That was a revelation to me, what a difference that made. And maybe I'll stop there, actually, because that's a pretty powerful point to end on.
Yes, and I think it drives home the point on what is the social purpose of insurance, what can it do out there to really be an agent of change, I think. It's very, I think we also helps us reflect, because while we can be here very quite comfortably sitting here in Madrid, we should acknowledge that we are basically part of the 1% there, and the vast majority are not privileged. And I think that's the reality that's getting more and more exposed as we live through a post-COVID world with global warming. And I think there's an inherent desire to really bridge that inequality and increasingly find ways for insurance to be really relevant to the times and even strengthen its contribution. So with that, let's go to a combination of South Africa and the UK, because Deepak represents a company that originated from Africa with a very disruptive model, I would say, that has actually been diversified in Europe and the UK. So Deepak, your views at Vitality.
Thank you, Butch. So Vitality, as Butch says, is part of the Discovery Group in South Africa. We have a very simple yet very profound core purpose, and that core purpose, which drives our business model, is simply to make people healthier, to enhance and protect their lives. And that's been our founding principle since day one. Now, health, I believe, is a fundamental component of ESG and sustainability. Everything we've talked about over the last day and a half is centered around kind of people. And if people don't have good health, actually everything falls apart. And nothing was better demonstrated than the pandemic, that actually health was the most valuable asset that humans valued at that time over the last 2-3 years. So it's a really, really kind of key point. So this session, I think, is fundamentally important, and as important as all the conversations we've had around capital, assets, climate, etc. It's very easy to measure money, but actually, how do you measure good health? And there is a point actually, where kind of 3 years post the pandemic, and actually we're just carrying on with our lives, and we've forgotten about kind of the empty cities, and we would kind of cross the road if you saw another human coming towards you. Life has changed, but actually it's left us with a bit of a change and a bit of a legacy, in that kind of focus around health and well-being is now paramount. And what we're seeing, particularly in London and globally as well, is that actually the demand for healthcare is skyrocketing. We've got waiting lists in London which are kind of so large. The headlines every day, how are we going to fix this? And the supply of healthcare is shrinking. So we have a major issue. And I believe we as insurers have a role to play. We as leaders in this room really have a role to play with the products that we provide. And the paper that we launched in June in London, Health is Our Greatest Wealth, it says it all. There were two kind of core components to that. One, centered around health risk prevention, and secondly, around closing the protection gap. And I believe if we focus on health risk prevention, we can actually make insurance far more engaging. Because if you look at life and health insurance, the way it's traditionally been sold, it's been you get underwritten up front, and actually you let the customer go off and not worry about their insurance. They're just paying premiums. But they get peace of mind, but they kind of get this piece of paper, which is a contract of insurance, lock it away in a drawer, and hopefully never to see it again. And the model that we've adopted worldwide now is one around engaging our members in their well-being. So when you're a customer of Vitality, we will incentivize you, motivate you to understand your health as that first step. So you'll answer a few simple questions around your lifestyle. tell us how much exercise you do, how much stress you have, how much alcohol you consume, etc. And that will play back a vitality age, which gives you a sense of what your vitality kind of status is compared to your actual age. And then we'll give you the tools to actually improve your health. Free health checks, free gym access, free Apple Watches, etc. So using technology, behavior change models, gamification, etc. And then benevolent bribes. Who doesn't like kind of being rewarded for good behavior? We all want to do healthy things, right? But it's actually very hard. You'll see that dessert and the fruit. It's kind of very tempting to go for the dessert. After your meal, at the end of the day, do you want to go out for a walk or do you want to sit on the sofa and watch television? We've created this model now, which is kind of centered around active rewards. So if you do your activity, you'll be rewarded with weekly, monthly, and kind of regular rewards. Something as simple as a free weekly coffee really motivates people to go out to the park and run around the block. And it's staggering what people will do for a free cup of coffee. It really is. Free movie tickets, etc. So it really does work. And when we introduced this active rewards, we saw engagements really drive up. So that's the kind of practical model. But the effect of that is that actually our members who are engaged are far, far healthier. And we've got the stats and the science and the data that actually proves that. So during COVID, for example, our members that were engaged in vitality and looking after their health, what we found is that they were 30% less likely to be hospitalized. That's really telling. Our members who are engaged live longer and healthier. So there's a lot of proof points that actually prove that the model really does work. So I believe health wraps around ESG. I'm not suggesting we introduce another letter to put H in there, but I think health really wraps around it and acts as a foundation. If we don't have good health, we have nothing. And the paper that we launched in June really provides tremendous case studies, and it's a real example of collaboration globally across insurers and reinsurers, really looking to share ideas to say, take this to your markets, because actually, we can really make a difference to the world and actually be a force for social good. There's a lot more I want to say, but I'll kind of pause there and kind of allow some debates and thoughts and questions to come through.
Thank you, Deepak. And I think this also articulates what we keep on saying, the PSI, that the risk in insurance, if you follow the risk management continuum, risk transfer is at the end of that continuum. The risk manager role of insurers in terms of understanding and preventing and reducing risk is very important as well, and often neglected in the value proposition. And you can apply that thinking of prevention to largely any sustainability issue. Net zero. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions to net zero emissions is, one can say, the ultimate form of disaster risk reduction. Prevention of catastrophic climate change. Nature positive. That's preventing harm on nature is better than restoring nature that has already been damaged, right? And the same for human health, right? And I think the question is, why hasn't everyone adopted a model like that? Shouldn't all life and health insurers be really championing that and not just a few?
I think it's a great question. It touches on the previous session where we were talking about within the industry, we can kind of get really bogged down by the traditional way of doing things. I remember when we launched Vitality in the UK back in 2007. I was one of the first employees, very fortunate to have been there. And I remember the headlines actually saying, this will never work. It's going to be a niche proposition. And initially, I mean, you're right, people were kind of pushing back. The distribution channels were saying, Deepak, no, please don't come knocking on my door. I'm very comfortable in my habitual behaviors. I'll sell the cheapest product. And we broke down the doors and went up and down the country and said, look, the model is, very, very clever, but they didn't want the difference. And, we call it our shared value model. And what we've done is we've created value by getting the member to change their behavior. They've actually bent the mortality curves downwards. They're actually going to live longer. Now, that value that we've created means that the customer is healthier, they win, and they get all these rewards and lower premiums. We benefit as an insurer because now we've got fewer claims, which is brilliant. the savings that we make on those lower claims, we play back to the customer and provide them there. And the other brilliant benefit is that society benefits, because national health systems means that society is generally healthier, and actually you're creating positive outcomes societally. Fewer people smoking, reduced diabetes, so on and so forth. So the model really works. We are now starting to see actually people take interest, because when you see that we're making inroads, our competitors don't sit still and say, oh my goodness, Vitality's gaining market share, and we're starting to see people come in and actually take interest, which is great. We want that to happen, because we don't all want to be chasing the same business. And this is the other point. It actually can create a bigger market, so we can protect more people, help close that protection gap. And the other thing is, you're now starting to engage consumers. Insurance is not a very engaging proposition. I mean, it's not the kind of sexiest product in the world. But when you talk about it in the context of things that people want, like Apple Watches, gym discounts, people are kind of, oh, wow, actually, this is a great proposition. I'm getting something back for the premiums that I'm paying. So it actually starts to become, a consumer-engaged proposition, and its value becomes higher in society.
Thank you, Deepak. I think you're a living example. I mean, I think Vanessa touched on it earlier, that you can actually teach an old dog new tricks. So you can't simply have the traditional mindset of like, here's my product off the shelf, I'm going to sell it like that. You can actually be progressive with your thinking. And I'm also a living example, because I was at Vitality's office in London. If you go to their offices, it looks like a gym. And before the event happened, we were served with smoothies, with different fruits. Almost anything you touch was really healthy. They have signs on how many steps to reach the other side of the room. It's amazing. The culture on health is really embedded in the work environment itself.
I would just add to that. I mean, that's part of our culture. It's part of our DNA. So I mentioned our core purpose being to make people healthier and enhance and protect their lives. It's underpinned by 9 values, which I could reel off, but I won't. But we live and breathe this, and we want everyone to embrace this, because it's good for everyone. There are no trade-offs. Everybody wins. Great.
Let's go to the Geneva Association. For those of you who don't know, the Geneva Association is really a leading global think tank for the global insurance industry. Their members are insurance CEOs, including Mafre's CEO here. And I know he's speaking at the 50th anniversary of the Geneva Association in November. But the reason why we are partnering with the Geneva Association is because they have a long-established track record on health and aging, at the Geneva Association, and they've done so much work. And they also released a social sustainability report a couple of months ago, and I saw Adrita present in one of the Geneva Association meetings, and I said we have to get her in one of those PSI events to really maximize what we can make out of what think tanks like the GA is really doing out there. So Aditi, it would be great to hear the thoughts from the Geneva Association on this. Has always been a priority for you, and I know you're progressing a lot with your work.
Yes, hello everyone, and thanks Butch again for inviting the Geneva Association, me to be present in this panel. Always great to work and meet new people. So as you have just said, there's a lot of research work across P&C and health and life that happens in the Geneva Association, has been happening for the last 50 years. But I think our ethos is not insurance research for the sake of insurance, but in terms of creating a better, more resilient society. So any research that we do across all the lines is very much focused on that. And Health and Life, the one that I lead, is also very much focused on that. So look, I'm a health economist, and I will boil this down to a very simple start. So you showed the ESG slide. You talked about mortality risk, morbidity risk, longevity risk, hospitalization risk. So these are typically the kind of health risks that you're looking at, typically the health insurance products you're looking at. And you can translate the same things in terms of risk that's faced by public health systems as well. So the risks are the same. The models of delivery are somewhat different. But Now, if you think about what are the three major things that's most likely to reshape these things going forward, the three most likely things are going to be demography, climate, and technology. Demography, why? Because if we grow older, there will be more incidence of chronic illnesses, there will be more prevalence of chronic illnesses, and there's going to be increased vulnerability from adverse climate events. We are going to live longer, and we are potentially going to run out of money. And we also know that people are already running out of money 10 years after their retirement. And financial well-being is one of the biggest source of mental health problems. So there is really an opportunity here to think beyond just products, financial products that cover mortality, morbidity, longevity, and hospitalization. And in order to do that, we have to factor these massive drivers that really chime very well with the ESG list that you had put on the right-hand side of the slide. Because right now, the models are very much based on a transactional model that was created in the Second World War, post-Second World War. And those realities have massively changed. And sticking to those models will make our operating very, very challenging over the coming years. So let me just, qualify that point with some sort of very quick high-level figures. We will have close to a third of people in OECD countries who will be over the age of 65 by 2050. We already have a lot of people living with about 2 chronic illnesses. About 60% of people over the age of 65 in OECD countries are already living with 2 chronic illnesses. And the incidence of chronic illnesses is rising in the young population. In fact, not so long ago, there was an article in the FT, I don't know if you recall, said in the G20 group of countries, the fastest growing cancer rate is actually in the late 20s age group. There are things that we need to think about. And these are challenges that we cannot be dealing with using the current business model. So ESG and business goes hand in hand. We cannot survive these shifts with the business model that we have, but in order to address that, we also end up addressing fundamental societal needs that we are talking about here. So arresting morbidities through prevention, doing better case management for people who are sick already, will give you the kind of economic span that you want to give people in order to work for longer and ensure their social security or their old age security. So the life and health, the purposes that they fill in people's life are increasingly converging, and they're sort of coming together. And this is really where the proof of the pudding will be about how fast we can move in that direction. And I would say there are some really good innovations out there.
Thank you, Adrita. I just wanted to pick one of the things that you said that struck me, and it's this concept of healthy aging is really not yet widespread. And people think that you only worry about it when you're into your late 50s and 60s. But the stat about the younger generation being beset with chronic illnesses like cancer, with ultra-processed foods and everything, is really alarming. So you would think about mac and cheese and those sort of things for kids who are really consuming so much of those ultra-processed foods, and thinking that you can actually be 50 and be healthier than a 20-year-old who's been loaded with ultra-processed. How is that gaining traction with the evidence that we're showing right now, or not?
Perhaps just too early. I would say, I think prevention is definitely something on the radar, and I think this would be a real opportunity to arrest that in that age group. I mean, a lot of you may agree that as a voluntary insurer, we have tended to focus on certain population segments, and often the young and the healthy. So in the sense that if we can arrest that morbidity in that age group. We are potentially moving in the right direction by actually carrying or just managing that risk right from the beginning. Like you say, you don't wait until people turn 50 only to give them a product. Healthy aging is throughout the life course, so you have to start really early to make sure by the time they reach 60, they are in a place where they are living healthy, they can work, and they can secure their future.
Thank you. I just want to check in with the audience if there's any question before I probe you further. Yes. Please introduce yourself. And then I think we have another one there from Mafre.
Hi, I'm Joshua Gill from Insurance CRM. It's clear that collecting customer data can create better ESG life and health insurance products, but I wondered if you find that some sort of like special engagement is needed with customers regarding the data, particularly as it is so personal.
Should we pick up the other question from Monica from Mafre?
Thank you, and thank you for your thoughts. Adrita, you say that demographic, climate, and technology is your three keys for this. But I thinking about that in the private sector, but you don't talk nothing about the social and the governance sector, because in this moment, in the different countries, with our private insurance, we cannot cover the entire people that are lack to have solutions to the health. So what we can do, or what our Geneva Association doing with the governance, with the associations, because we have a very big gap. If we see not only in the countries in Latin America, but also the figures in the US, the people that cannot get to the health insurance. And if you don't have a health insurance, even though paracetamol, I don't know say what in English, but what you are doing in the Geneva Association for that matter?
Yeah, sure.
We can take it reverse. So take that first, and then we'll ask someone to answer the other question from, is it Josh? Josh.
Yeah. I'm happy to do that, but Josh, I think your point is very, very valid. So I'm happy to sort of quickly respond to Josh's as well. So just very quickly on that, Josh, you're absolutely right. And I don't think it's just the customer engagement. I think there's a real need for policy engagement because we are seeing a lack of parameter in terms of what data to use and how. You will all know some of the legislations that's happening in this continent about right to be forgotten. I mean, they have major implications if we are talking about customization of health and life services for customers. If we erase their data, how are we going to customize? I think that's a fundamental thing. But then perhaps rather than, cutting the wing, you clip the wing and say, look, use data only in this way. And that can be not about pricing, but about risk differentiated services where you can provide more customized services. But those kind of dialogue definitely we need and we are in dire need of. So just acknowledging that point and just not just with consumers, but with policymakers. To your point, thank you. I think it's a very valid question. I don't see demography, technology, and climate shaping the private sector health and life insurance world. I think that is the health and life world, be that be in the public sector, be that be in the private sector. I think you perhaps already know from this country and in many other countries what happened with social care and elderly care during COVID. That did not just happen in the private sector space. That happened in the public sector space. So you're absolutely right. But these issues are cost-cutting, and the innovations that are happening are either happening through a lot of government and private sector dialogue, and there are some glimpses of that. I would say even in this continent, we have seen partnerships with sickness funds and government working in a particular area and doing a proper population health management system rather than just doing claims. Okay, here you go, claims. They are looking at the entire need of the population in different tiers of need and trying to address it that way. And sometimes it is government mandated, and privately delivered. So there are things that are happening. Similarly, there are lots of things that are going on with access. I will just give you a very clear example. So diabetes is one area, and I'll use a life insurance example. You wouldn't normally give a life insurance policy to somebody who is diabetic. In many, many settings. And one of the ways it's doing, some players are doing it is through conditional underwriting. So you keep yourself healthy, you do your blood glucose level, and you check in with us, and you will have a life insurance policy. What's that doing? That's taking away some of the burden from the public sector in terms of this person not, having that income protection who might not have otherwise. It's also giving the person the security that they need in old age, but it's also helping insurers to grow the model using a market segment that was previously completely untapped. So in some ways, some of these innovations are already happening, and I think we alluded to the parametric insurance, and a lot of that also is having an active dialogue with the government. So it's not just the three shapers of private health and life insurance. I think it's the shapers of what we are going to see in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone want to add to that?
Just maybe add a couple of points. I mean, just on the data point, I think it's really important to engage with your customers, your members, actually be very open and transparent, making it kind of privacy by design. So letting them know what you're using the data for. And actually you find that, consumers can be happy to share their data if there's something in it for them. So that's kind of a very basic point. And just on the point that you make around kind of private and public, I think there does need to be more collaboration. No one entity, no one sector can solve all of these major issues. And there are really good examples, even in the paper actually, that talk to private-public collaborations across the globe. So it's worth a look at the paper. There's some great examples there. It's not easy. I think Vanessa mentioned earlier that it's not easy working with governments. It's slow, but there are great examples where things can work.
And one thing I can add is that in the Health is Our Greatest Wealth paper, I think one interesting case study there is the government of Singapore, where they are actually promoting this health prevention policy across the entire country as a paramount to the sustainability of the Singaporean population. It's a very interesting thing that's happening there, and I think what we're seeing here is something that at the government level they're trying to do in Singapore. I wanted to touch on one thing. We have 10 minutes left, so good. That's really big, and Adrita touched on it, but by definition, good health means physical health and mental health. And we haven't touched enough on mental health to really understand what we can do. And I think you mentioned financial security as a source of mental health. But I think in the past few years, I think there has been this issue. Do you want to touch on that, on what your organizations are doing? Because this is often neglected in the overhaul. Just like when we talk about sustainability, and people tend to gravitate towards non-life as the immediate thing. When people talk about health, it's physical health, not just, and people tend to forget mental health. Can we touch on that? Yeah. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, happy to have a go.
Okay.
Yeah. So mental health, I mean, it is a major crisis. There's been a fundamental shift, I think, over the last, I'd say, 5 years in actually it being acceptable to be talked about, particularly in the UK. There have been a number of high-profile people who have come out and said, we all have a mental health and people suffer from it. Within the insurance context, again, there has been quite a strong shift whereby health insurers are now kind of covering it without the exclusions and actually making provision. And actually through the use of technology. So a lot of the talking therapies, we call it, are provided in a virtual way. So 80% of our mental health services, we provide 8 sessions, and it's kind of, we've seen an explosive growth in our claims profile where people are actually using these services. And the great thing that does is it actually opens up access, because virtual healthcare and virtual kind of mental health care can be delivered much faster, much easier. And the other great thing about that is actually it frees up access to face-to-face mental health for those that have more acute needs. So I think there's a real focus from insurers in addressing this. And anxiety, mental health has become much, much more prevalent. I mean, it's probably underreported, a decade or so ago, and it's kind of coming out now. But with the polycrisis that we've seen, cost of living crisis, COVID, climate anxiety, there's a whole host of issues. So it's kind of out there more and more. And I think you make a good point. It's, these things don't live in isolation. It's looking at the kind of whole person. Everything is connected, whether it be your physical health, your mental health, and relating that back to kind of wellness. So doing things like physical activity, eating well. If you do all the right things, a lot of these things can be kind of risk managed.
Thank you. Moira?
Sure. If I could touch just a bit on the intersectionality and bring that to the mental health question. As a home and auto insurer, one of the things that we're very aware of is the mental health toll that happens when there's a physical risk that materializes in a catastrophe, if it's a flood or a wildfire. What happens to a person who has to leave their home with 5 minutes to gather everything that's of importance to them and get out of town? And then because of whatever, the flood or the fire, they're not at home maybe for Christmas to spend Christmas with their family because they're not back in their home yet. So the trauma that the realization of a physical risk has on your mental health, and for insurers like mine that has both the home and auto business and the life and health business, the importance of looking at the broad customer experience and looking at how we can support our customers right the way across with all of the different insurance products and services that we've got to bear. The other thing is on the opportunity. So we had the great presentation with the launch of the Nature Positive, and to move this to a more positive discussion. So we had the launch of the Nature Positive papers. In Canada, there's a group of Physicians for the Environment who've partnered with Parks Canada to come up with an initiative about prescribing time in nature as a way to improve mental health. So they're actually writing a prescription for time in nature. So as an intersectionality, and bringing back to the last session, there are ways that we can use our focus in nature to actually help with our health.
Thank you so much. And I think there's also that concept of forest bathing in Japan that's really showing a lot of benefits for physical and mental health. Did you want to add anything, Teresa, from HSBC on the mental health agenda?
I think for mental health, it's I think from a workplace perspective, this is also an important agenda, and I think we started off with a lot of mental health support for employees, and also I think I agree that from a customer's perspective, I think mental health this is more widely talked about. I think. Maybe in the Western countries as versus in the East, I think maybe there will be some mental health sometimes may be seen as like being crazy, and it's something is a taboo that maybe from Asian perspective is not easily openly discussed. But I think, as we said, for when we look at holistic well-being, it's not just physical well-being. It's about physical, your body, your mind, and also money. All these are interrelated. So I think as a way we should be doing things like from a product perspective, there could be opportunities for us to look into like how we underwrite and provide more coverage on mental health patients, and also maybe from a value-added service perspective in our health insurance products where we could like provide mental counseling support. So I think there are definitely, this is a risk, but equally is an also opportunity for us to support our customers in the long term.
Right, and I agree with you. Being an Asian myself, on the that could be taboo in certain cases, and more often than not, you'll get a stare and say, like, what's wrong with you? Don't take life too seriously and everything like that. But it's a real issue, and I think there's a cultural change that's needed as well to be more transparent about this issue. You wanted to chime in on that? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say two things. Firstly, not so long ago, we published a whole research report on insurability of mental health, and I would not go over the findings because you will all find it freely available on our website. And I think that says quite a lot about the current landscape of what's happening with insurance and mental health. But the one thing I also want to make sure, and I say this everywhere I talk about mental health is also not just in the context of physical health. People think about health systems and health insurance. If you look at the figures of payouts for mental health, one of the ones that we can quantify quite well is that every year we have 15 billion USD paid out for mental health related disability claims. That's a life insurance issue. That's not a health insurance issue. Health insurance may be covering mental health and they are paying for it. It's very, very hard to quantify because, as we say, it's fairly nascent. But they may be picking up the cost in some other way, like in a physical illness. We know there's a strong correlation between poor mental health and poor physical health. So, but I just wanted to really emphasize it is not just a health issue. Mental health is more than a health policy issue and health insurance issue. It's also a life insurance issue.
Thank you. There's one burning question at the back, and then we'll add with a short statement from each one. I think the gentleman there in the northwest. Yeah. Yes.
Thanks very much for the presentation. My question relates...
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, sorry. I'm Mael Lagadek from Sustainalytics. Question related to mental health as well. Is eco-anxiety a new topic that you're looking at? And how do you see eco-anxiety becoming an issue, especially for the young population, who do face and realize younger than probably the other generations what is ahead of us in terms of nature, biodiversity loss, and climate change?
Very quick answer. It's in the paper, the ESG guide that was flagged, eco-anxiety. There's other things there, antimicrobial resistance, neurodiversity. There's so many things that we haven't even covered here, but I think
I just wanted to say that, yes, this is on our radar, but like everything to do with climate change and health, it's very, very hard to quantify. And the area is very, very new. In fact, we are doing exactly that piece of research now. But yes, it's on the radar, but I don't think we have a huge amount to quantify the risks.
Okay, let's end with a top thought from each one of you on what is the change that you want to see there that you think would really catalyze action on the health and sustainability agenda? Just one.
Maybe I'll start first.
Okay.
I would say for the paper, for the life and health paper, the 4-point strategy, to me, out of the 4-point, collaboration still remains the key. Today we have insurers like Vitality and also Geneva Association. But I think to address this problem and to drive better health outcomes and closing protection gap is a whole to society approach. So we need to continue to work with local communities and governments and also to drive this agenda. And even though these two publications seems to be marking a completion for the PSI Life and Health work stream, but I believe is opening another new chapter for us, and this journey will definitely continue. So I will encourage people in the room and also virtually to read these two papers and then to bring it back to your companies and how we could embed these like ESG considerations in your everyday like product design, your operations, or the investment that you make. Thank you.
Thank you. Deepak?
So, similar theme. Just really getting a call to action out there. We're all responsible for this. You're all working in the industry. You have a role to play. Please own this so that we can collectively and collaboratively really make a change. Focus on wellness, not on sickness. Only 5% is spent on wellness, 95% on sickness at the point of treatment. And I'll just borrow one phrase from Dr. Tedros, which is, illness, sickness does not start in hospitals. It starts from the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the exercise that we do. We all have a role to play. Please embrace this yourselves.
Adrita?
I would say focus on the ecosystem of needs. There's one quote when I was writing a paper on digital health that came up to me by a major insurer who said, look, I'm a doctor, and if somebody sends me or if my patient starts sending me blood glucose readings using 10 apps, using 10 different apps, this is not sustainable. So really thinking about how the digital and the physical architecture really fit in to take care of somebody throughout the life course, throughout the care continuum. I think that's the way. So let's just not stop at one new proposition, one new digital app, but think about the continuation. If somebody has diabetes, what are we going to do rather than just keeping them, safe from diabetes? There's a care continuum there. So that would be my takeaway.
Thank you. Moira?
I'll also echo a call to action to say that a focus on inclusion instead of looking to exclude more populations, more diseases, more communities, finding more ways to include, of course, partnering with those communities so that you're doing it properly in a way that is actually going to benefit them. That is a way that the industry as a whole can grow and that a company itself can find a way to grow profitably. It is a good business proposition.
Thank you. And since I'm moderating this, I'll have two thoughts to end the session. One is, I think, Josh, you're with Insurance ERM. You need to write more about these things at Insurance ERM, right? I think that would be great. That would go for media and everyone else. I think we need to communicate this and, really maximize our spheres of influence. I'd like to end the thought with on sustainability because really, and I said this in London, ultimately, sustainability, the planet has been around for 1 billion years, right? Ultimately, sustainability is social because it really, what matters is that how we as human beings are able to lead productive and healthy lives with dignity on this planet. And nothing is more social than life and health. So I think we should think about the connection between the planet and humans, and I think what we really value the most. And I think the reason why we are embracing the climate change challenge, the nature challenge, is because we want to be able, many people, all people, to lead healthy, dignified lives, right? So I think this is a really good lever to think about what sustainability really means for all of us. And I think everything that we've heard the past few days is really oriented towards that aspiration. And with that, it brings us very nicely to the last session, which is on the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.